We're live.
I meant to do that.
Oh, I thought we were live earlier.
I totally did.
Yeah, we
just
saw it on
fall
here.
off a chair just now.
Huh.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well now we're live. Cool.
Okay, well, now
I
we're
am
live.
actually-
We're saving it.
I am actually a singing Wario.
It's not. Let's go officially start.
Can I,
All right.
All right.
Ian, can I tell the feed what time my behind the scenes panel is?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, go for
I
it.
have one more panel. So
Yeah, that's
self-promo.
exactly that's actually what I have on my schedule here. So let me get
You're
that
braver
back.
than all of us, Bonnie.
I went to one panel that I wasn't in.
I played one pinball game.
I haven't even been to I haven't seen any games.
There's some good games in there. You should check out some of those games.
All right, so
I love you all.
thank you for being here.
People.
It means a lot. So we are Surviving Indie, and this panel is Surviving Indie Presents a Look Inside Game Audio. So for those who are interested in game audio, I want to help give you an insight of what it's like to work in the indie game industry. Some of the things we'll be talking about today are what it's like to work in-house compared to what it's working as a freelancer, the pros and cons of each, and more stuff like that.
Hey, who are you?
Well, my name is John Montoya. I've been a musician, composer, overall producer since I was around 14 years old. I'm very fortunate I was able to find my passion at a very young age. At the age of 17, I signed my first publishing deal with Jingle Punks, and ever since then, I've been working in game audio. I'm a part of, actually, I think, are we all a part of the Materia Collective?
I'd like to be a part of Material Collective eventually.
You're in now. If
Yeah,
You're in it now.
congratulations.
Oh, hey!
So we're all a part of Materia Collective, and we're basically a bunch of just musicians all over the world remixing music.
Also,
and
I'll show you how easy it is to connect with people. I'll just reference this because we're going to talk about it later. Emily, have this ribbon from the Materia Collective to put on your badge.
Amazing.
You're unofficial.
You're now
official.
a member of the Materia Collective.
It's beautiful.
Sorry. I just,
you know that is very
was just
relevant.
in my backpack.
That's very relevant.
that's
So-
that easy.
We're all video game musicians. We all love game audio, and that's what brought us here today because we want to show you guys, not necessarily easy, but like how anyone can get into this kind of work, and it's just enough passion, dedication. You guys can do it. So, who are you guys?
That's a deep question. I'll say, I'm next to you, so I'll go first. My name is Bonnie Bogovich. I am a sound designer and composer. I work under the title Black Cat Bonafide, and I've worked on a lot of virtual reality games. Most recently, my favorite one was I Expect You to Die. On a good day, I can also sing. I sang the title theme song, and on the side, I write really weird shows. I helped write Super Smash Opera, which performed Aria Kart last night. For the Materia Collective, I'm more known as the Queen of the Block Choir. I write for singing puppet chickens, like the Muppet Show style, and also serious choral pieces. And but yeah, most of my clientele and most of my projects are indie projects, and they're also most of my favorite type, which is why I'm on this panel.
I'm Nathaniel Chambers. I've been doing game audio in an experienced fashion for about 5 years. But I probably started 20 years ago in terms of like digital audio and trying to compose and do sound design, stuff like that. So yeah, that's like what, 5 years working. That's 1/4 of my time I've actually been doing things more professionally. But I do sound effects, music, mixing, mastering. Occasionally I do dialogue effects, which I made a bunch of, people sound like robots at some point. And am I forgetting anything?
Sometimes you do voice
I also talk too much about board games on a fairly normal basis, so there's that.
You're an awesome video game composer. I love your music personally.
Thank you.
So
He has a game that's on the floor.
yes,
At least one.
I have
Possibly
two games on the
Yes, two
floor,
games.
Wait, really?
although ironically, I think neither of them have speakers.
No. Which ones are they?
You can imagine
Particle
how awesome it
Mace
is.
and Crystal Brawl. Particle Mace, I think, had a tournament yesterday, which was cool, and I found 2 spare copies of the soundtrack in my wallet, so I gave them out as tournament prizes, I think. I hope that worked out. And then Crystal Brawl, I'm not sure has a tournament going on, but yeah, that's an awesome 4-player title. I recommend
The
you check it
football
out.
one?
No, that's not here this time. But that usually is here, apparently, so I'll have to check it out some other time.
He's just too popular.
So Emily,
Okay, so I guess I've been doing game audio professionally on and off since 2013. which was the year I graduated from the University of Texas with my degree in composition. And you might be thinking, like, wow, you've only been doing this for 3.5 years compared to Nathaniel and Bonnie. You're like an idiot baby. And that might be true. But I like to think that my mistakes are so much more recent that I could impart so much more information about them. And that's what I intend to do.
And even though you call yourself an idiot baby, I guess that makes me an old crone, but I have a lot of old crone mistakes that I can also impart. Some even recent. But I know you meant that endearingly.
Yes.
Load it up so we can check out the questions as well.
So one of the first questions I have for you guys, and this maybe is for you because I know you've worked in-house. What is the difference between working in-house and working as a freelancer, and what are some of the pros and cons of each?
Well,
Yeah, I should.
Do we have 2 hours? I can say so. I worked. I had some good sort of insight and differences because I actually came from the contract world before I was an in-house person, and I still did some contract stuff on the side. And I continued just being back contract once I wasn't. But I had 5.5 years of being the in-house audio lead at Shell Games out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we did mostly educational titles, and then eventually we started working on VR. And so in my particular case, when I hopped on, it was about 20 people on staff, and I was the only audio person. And when I left, there was about 110 people on staff, and I was one of 2 audio people. So one thing I learned pretty quick when you're in-house is I was warned, because I used to work on film and theater and other things, that audio usually comes last. And unfortunately, in big studios and even smaller ones, people graduate from schools in game art and stuff and producer classes actually being told and game audio always comes last. It's kind of sad, but that's what happens. So when I first started being there, audio was still coming last, but whenever you are planted in-house as the troubadour of your team, I was the captain of my own one-person department, hey, sounds important, woo. You have this benefit of being around when people start gathering for weird meetings, like changing a desert game into a snow game, or all the robots are now octopuses, and all these things that might affect your list later. Or maybe you have a really good idea for music before they even start planning level 1 that might help influence where things are going to go, or you have some input on, hey, maybe we should build audio tools before we make a list of 7,000 sound effects. So I find the biggest benefit of being in-house, especially in a smaller studio, is you can be there and physically see people plotting things that might affect your workload and have an immediate input because they can see you and you're there. Whenever it gets bigger, luckily I had 2 people on my team, including Tim Roscoe, who also was in Smash Aria. I'm tired. In the Super Smash Opera Presents Aria Kart with live orchestra last night, Tim Roscoe and I, even with 2 of us, we were both working at the same time, I think on 6 to 8 projects. So we could still hunt people down, but the downside, okay, so those are the plus sides. Hunting people down, good, in a big studio. Downside, whenever you're in-house, is if it gets that big, you might be invited to things called scrums, which is a good thing. That's a meeting in the morning where people say what they're working on. You might have 8 scrums scheduled all at the exact same time, and because you're the only person pinpointed as audio for that, you have to do this giant mental battle of, okay, all right, well, I have to be in 7 build rooms at the same time, but oh, they're plotting and changing it into robots again. What do I do? So you have to learn tricks like, finding advocates and stuff that I'm sure we'll talk about maybe a little bit later. All right, so that's the cons. So plus, you're there. You can see people working on the game. Negative. If you end up on too many things because you're you have to grow clones of yourself. All right, so and then indie, the pros of being indie is you can take on a lot of different things and you kind of feel more of a free agent and maybe you like being brought in near the end, but then the downside is usually indie people are not even contracted or considered until near the end of the cycle because it's all right, they've done stuff, oh crap, I got a week. We need 4,000 sounds. Hey, contractor we use, boo. So I guess the flexibility is you can work in your pajamas. That's great. Working in your pajamas is awesome. You can work in the comfort of your home, maybe out of a coffee shop. Downside is you don't see the plotting and the planning. Yeah. Does it, any other specific type of differences you were thinking of? That you wanted
Is it
to say?
riskier considering you're at in-house?
Oh,
you have a
gosh.
You have a guaranteed job, and then compared to being freelance, it's like,
Plus of being an in-house person, if you're working all the time, is you have health care usually, if you're on like full-time status, and you have vacation days. This magical thing I learned about called vacation days and sick days. If you're not in-house, if you are sick one day, you just aren't making money. It's kind of just how it goes. And you don't have a guarantee that every day you're making a paycheck. You might have a big project that comes up once in a while when you're a contractor, but there are those gaps where, I don't know, maybe all the games you worked on have shipped and you're just, just waiting around or pitching yourself at a convention or something. So the con of being an in-house person, even though you have healthcare and everything else, once you're in-house staff, there's this thing called overtime sometimes that exists. If you're ever a salaried employee, overtime does not exist. So you can be worked 80 hours a week. Like some people hear about stories of people who work in California and they're like sleeping under their desks and stuff because, oh my God, the deadline. Also, at home, you might do that as a contractor, but at least you can just walk to your bed, which is maybe in the same room, or,
Isn't the same area.
and you can pet your cat while you go, ah. So no cat to pet when stressed, cat to pet. I need someone else
another
to talk.
issue is, of course, not all in-house places let you work on outside gigs at the same time.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So
There's
some people
Was it
may
called
have-
non-conflict? What's the term?
Non-compete.
Non-compete. There are things called non-compete clauses. Emily, I think you might have a good example of how
I don't know if you have that.
you
Well,
sort of have one, but you can still work.
Yeah. So I actually currently work in-house. That is my day job, but I work in-house at a company called Every, and we put out 90 casino games a year. And we do have some sort of non-compete, but it really only comes into play if I were to work on other casino games in my off hours. And I wouldn't want to do that, so I like a little variety in my projects. So I am able to work on indie stuff on the side,
Cool.
which is why I'm here.
Nate, do I?
Yeah.
Nate, you
Any
looked like you had
insights?
stuff.
Well, honestly, Bonnie, you covered most of it. I'd say that, I'd say for me, I guess the really biggest difference is the stability. It's the health insurance. It's the vacation days. I know it's maybe a little bit unglamorous to think about the financial costs of game audio, and having it covered for you, it really does change everything. And I think the only thing I would add, just anecdotally, I definitely agree that one of the pros is being physically in the space with your team. Although now that I think about it, I actually work with a team that's mostly based in Chicago. So sometimes you can be in-house and still have to deal with that. But also, I'm working on an indie game right now called Small Talk with a studio called Pale Room, and it's been lovely to work on, and the team is absolutely wonderful. But even though we're all in the same city, I'm not always as aware of milestone-related decisions, major changes, things like that, because they tend to talk to each other and not post on the Slack. But we've kind of gotten around that by having frequent meetings. So that's one thing to watch out for. There's a lot of different ways for communication to fall through.
And that's actually a good point. What's the difference between because I've worked sort of in-house and indie, the organization types, because some of it can be very disorganized and others can be very, very strict. In your experiences, have you ever had to learn new methodologies, or what is the difference from certain organization skills and whatnot from in-house to freelance?
Okay, I'd actually say that I'm using very similar things in-house and freelance. Both in-house and freelance, I'm using Slack, I'm using Trello, and I'm making a lot of sticky note lists. So, I think it's going to be very unusual for like someone managing a game audio person to be like, you need to organize your stuff this way. And unless it's like something that's shared, like an asset list.
Can I add on top of there?
Yeah.
I will find, I've worked both the indie and in-house, and also the in-house when it was nice, small, when you could see everyone at the same time, and when there's multiple floors and you can't see everyone. No matter how many systems you have in place, as human beings, we have a tendency to gather in little clusters at the water cooler kind of methodology, and big decisions happen, and I think it's impossible to ever guarantee that all the decisions made in those little moments will end up in some sort of an email or a traceable list and get out to everyone. Because I think I've never been on a project where everyone's always 100% on the same page, because they all weren't 100% sitting during that one little conversation that maybe will totally shift 4,000 tasks at the same time.
I hate to interrupt you. We're actually getting some questions from Twitch, and I want you guys to know
'Cause we're
that
live.
we're going to go through them. But right now we have some stuff we want to go through. But I promise we're going to get through them. And thank you for your questions.
Also, we'll keep an eye on them just to make sure it's not specifically relevant to what we're talking about at the exact
Yes.
moment, in which case we will try to.
Yeah, if it's like
address it.
super specific, then yeah, we're going to answer that.
And so it's not like we're ignoring you, we're just considering how
We
to
might
best
just be
answer.
ignoring you.
Very
Camera.
cool.
As a person who's only been indie, I think there's always a grass is greener on the other side mentality. I've met a lot of in-house people who like fawn for indie, and I've met endless indie people who fawn for in-house. That's me. But I think the biggest difference is as an indie, I've met more people who seem like they're going to potentially implode any minute. Like there is more financial struggle that I meet on the indie side, whereas I think there's more burnout on the in-house side that I've met. People who've worked in a way that just makes them like wake up, look in the mirror, and just like, I didn't know my eyes could go that low. Cool. So I think, yeah, there's just different struggles on both sides. Which one's worse, I guess, depends entirely on, you.
So should an audio person learn like a specific methodology, like for example, Scrum or anything like that, or should they just like kind of wing it?
I can say that maybe not learn, but if you're just starting out, insist on, you don't have to really state it as deadlines, because a lot of people like go, if you say the word deadline, but say regular check-ins, and always do it in a helpful manner, like, so I can make sure to help you to know that I'm always on the same page. And I find that on smaller projects and indie teams, once you start insisting that it would really help you to help them better if you checked in more than once every 5 months to know what's going on, and then they start to sort of fall in line and actually go, oh man, maybe we should do that in other departments. So maybe you'll help start a cascade of sort of disorganization and fix some problems early that would happen later. So.
And speaking of organization, it's very important that you find time for yourself. You need to make sure that you're healthy. That's one of the biggest things. Like, I know you had a spiel about this too, about making time for yourself and staying healthy.
The otaku fair thing where I've given talks before about take care of yourself, because we all don't, because we're musicians and stuff. And heck, come on, we're gamers too. So I find, and I have to tell myself this all the time, if you try to remind yourself maybe every 2 hours, especially during a deadline, have you actually breathed lately? And there's an app I worked on. It was just called Breathe. It was made for a UPMC, and it literally would set a reminder. Every once in a while, it would just go, "Hey, have you breathed?" and you're like, "Ha!" But then you're like, "Oh God, no, I haven't." And then you just kind of count out 5, and you breathe in 5, and you do a little longer. And then if you're in the middle of a panic of like, "Oh crap, everything's due," it's surprising how much that will help you. And also, like, I love that. I have I'm in the guest room because I got guest status this year, thank heavens, because it means I got tea. But they had little cards from something called Take This. There's a group here, an organization, and I recommend you guys all check out the AFK room that they set up for like if everything's too much, because they have these little cards and they're like achievements for people, and like, eat at least one identifiable object that could be called a vegetable today. Sleep at least 5 hours without moving today. It's like little things that we as artists always forget. And they make the biggest difference in the world. And also, this weekend they had Yoga for Gamers. I highly recommend checking out Daniel's website. There's a bunch of free yoga stuff. You might be like, ooh, yoga. But no, her yoga is made for people who are at computers all day, people who play games all day, and composers and musicians. So it's a lot of wrist treatments and stuff that pops your back. And if you're a standing desk person, she has good, like, how to reset your spine things. And it takes 5 to 10 minutes, but, like, seriously, we all take horrible care of ourselves, and the more you can do to take better care of yourselves, I think I said during our talk back then, if you try to crunch on a deadline, like in the wee hours of the morning, and you are dead, you are going to get 1/10 of the quality that you would if you took a couple hours or like a 30-minute nap and then started again.
Also, considering we're all musicians, we usually work in a closed space where there are no windows. Make sure you go outside.
Oh God, yes.
Plenty of sun, even if it's just for like 2 minutes, just walking outside, getting some fresh air will help tremendously.
And I know it seems like a heart attack, but turn your phone on airplane mode for like at least 15 minutes when you do that. So you aren't like, oh my God, on your phone. Just.
I know this isn't exactly audio, but
This
as
is
someone.
relevant for indies, I think.
Oh yeah, like any development, like just find time for yourself, because ultimately you have to take care of yourself, and otherwise you're not going to be able to fully work. You won't be able to put in 100%.
Yeah.
So always just take care of yourself. Always find time. Even if there's like a strict deadline, there's always time, like maybe even 10 minutes. Just go outside, just get some fresh air, walk around, enjoy life.
Oh.
And
another thing, especially if you're working on an indie game, everyone else is kind of indie. This is important. Remember that things in life happen that you cannot control, like maybe a family member dies. I had a death in the family. I had 2, actually, over the last couple of weeks, and it affected some deadlines. And you will find that, believe it or not, your clients are humans, and they will understand if someone has died and you need to go to a funeral. Like, it happens. Or you have the bubonic plague. It happens, because if you try to work with the plague, I'm sure you'll give plague quality work anyway. So, I mean, on the business end, finish it when you're not having the plague. But also, they're human beings, and we all generally understand that blizzards, deaths, and everything else, shit happens.
so we just got a question
Sorry,
on Twitch. Have you faced any challenges working with other musicians, either on an indie project or in-house?
Well, I don't know about like challenges, but I did collaborate on one of my games actually very recently. It was at my in-house day job. They put me on my first licensed title. It was a Buffy the Vampire Slayer game, and partially because I can't play guitar, and it's a very guitar-heavy soundscape, and partially because it was my first licensed game. They wanted to make sure that I didn't completely screw it up. I got to collaborate with my coworker, Jesse Deo, who has been doing music for like 15 years more than me. So that was helpful. Honestly, I'd say it was more helpful than it created challenges. The only I'd say the biggest issue was just distance, because Jesse was up in Chicago, and there were things that we did to get around that. There was actually a week in which I flew up to Chicago to just write music with him, and that was really great. But for everything else, for one piece in particular, I would make a mock-up, and then I would send it off to Jesse and just be like, okay, add real guitars to this. Like, all the notes are there. You just make it face melt. Just make all the faces melt. And and then he'd send it back, and it would be like, oh, real guitars. Oh, this is very good. And my face is melting. Oh, God.
I can say also, Nate, you should take this one.
I was going to say, one issue I faced, I decided to partly in a project that the project was very guitar driven, and I decided if I didn't have a real guitarist, this was going to just fall apart. It wasn't going to work because it was so guitar focused. And there were just a lot of tracks where that was the only instrument. I couldn't bury it in the mix that this was a fake guitar, which is what I would normally do. And so I had then decided to bring a real guitarist in, which I'm like, oh, that'll be easy, simple enough. I'll just pay this one hourly rate. The thing is that I didn't keep in mind, though, is that writing for fake guitar is super easy because it says this chord's playable, this chord's playable. It doesn't keep in mind transition time between chords. and how hard it is to say take a chord that's sustained and then quickly go to another chord that's sustained, and lots of little things I didn't think of. So I would say if you're even thinking of getting a real guitarist, maybe consult with one first, because I think that actually added, I'm gonna guess, at minimum 13 hours to my project, rewriting a lot of chords, because we had to change which chords were played or how they were played, which notes were on top, and then, if you change the order of the notes, like, man, sometimes that is a totally different feel when you have a B on top instead of an A on top or something like that. And then, yeah, there was just a lot of interesting compromises that we had to make.
And I can say I do a lot of stuff with voice actors and choir singers for some of the soundtracks and also dialogue. I have found that if you're in a pinch, especially if you don't have a lot of time to, if you can't coach someone directly, the best situation is you have someone directing while someone is recording themselves live, and they can hear you through an earpiece on Skype or whatever not, and you can kind of read the line for them of how you want them to inflect it, or if there's any words that are hard to pronounce, like an alien name.
We actually worked on a project recently, that Canadian thing where I had to give you...
Oh, God, yeah.
So that's actually a great example.
So it's great if you have a director person who can give you feedback. Now, in the situation John's talking about, I recorded some VO for a project for him, and I did things a couple ways. We got the gig, but then we had feedback on inflection and how things should work. It doesn't always happen that quick, and if you're in a crunch, the best thing you can do, especially, like I said, alien words, Latin, anything else, add a dictation guide. And I don't mean so much it all written out. Yes, if people wouldn't understand how to read all those funny little lines and everything, but have a guide of what you as the director, or you who's expecting the feedback to be, reading and pronouncing the words properly, is it thou or thou? Or is it hykonfinik or hykonifik in an alien language? Because otherwise you're going to have to, 4 emails of back and forth of, hey, can you have more I on the whatever? And the hardest thing, especially in sound descriptions, is having someone try to type what they want a sound to sound like in their own made-up language that they think you'll just magically get. So always give a recording, and you don't have to be a good voice actor, but if you want a certain pacing in a certain way and the A sounds weird, say it how you would and include that as a wave or an MP3, and it'll save you so much time. Oh my God. Yes.
So I'm curious, so we can help you guys better. I wanted to ask you guys, are you guys just fans of audio? Are you trying to be an active musician or audio professional? What do you guys do?
Or are you game developers looking to better communicate with your audio people?
In which case, bless you.
Yes, on Twitch, please ask. We would like to know how we can help you better.
Yeah, on Twitch, please. You might just be delayed in us counting you in.
Yeah. So, game developers. Anybody? Okay,
Cool.
one game developer.
Okay.
Musicians, current musicians looking to start being musicians,
Got
just
thumbs up,
all of
kind
the
of
above,
bouncing
or fairly established, just looking for more techniques. Let's go. Beginning, medium. Well done. You guys are well done musicians.
I like
awesome.
steak.
Well done.
Oh,
Say what? No, specifically, what level are you at? Are you beginner level, currently doing indie audio and doing fine, or are you super advanced and just being awesome by being here and judging us
Those are all
silently?
there's a lot of commas in those questions. I would also say, how many of you, since there was some beginning, how many of you have done a lot of music, but just not in the game world yet? Okay, see, that's a more clear thing. So it's more you're not, this is sort of a new universe for you, and it's a different kind of content that you're creating, and probably a different delivery. I don't know if that's on our bullet list of what's the difference of just working on music for a big piece as opposed to now you have to deliver a whole bunch of stuff for a game, because that is different.
yeah.
How you have to divide it all up and stuff.
So
Or we can try to get to that.
What was the question?
So if you're working on, we're going to play an orchestra piece, and you have to have a soundtrack for this thing that is linear, versus make music for my game.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Too.
Sorry, let's read the question is, do we handle implementation or we just hand the assets off? In my case, I would say the answer is yes. I have done it both ways. I much prefer doing the implementation myself because I think in one instance, now this was a very quick game. It was I think it was literally a game jam game, but it may not have been because my memory is a little fuzzy on it. But I remember one game I handed in the assets and they put the music in as a sound effect, which means if you went left in the level, the music panned right. So like, I know it's a little thing, and I know they were in the rush. It was like literally something that they were doing over the weekend. Either it was a game jam or not, I can't remember. But the point is, like, had I been more involved and with Unity at that point, I would have been able to just check that box. You know?
That also goes back to trying to add check-ins and trying to encourage that you're always on the same page.
Right.
So considering we actually have a mixture both here and online, I want to actually go ahead and just ask you guys questions about what you like to know. So anyone have any questions right now for us? Anything about indie game audio development, anything like that? Yes, sir.
I'm really interested. I've always noticed that it seems as though the sort of performers community and the video game composers community are quite disconnected.
Oh.
I wonder how indie game developers go about actually finding the people they're going to have to perform, as well as finding the people that are going to have to compose. But in particular, in one of the panels earlier in the weekend, I was really struck by hearing like a composer talk about surfing through YouTube to find which musician he was going to use to record a track. And I thought, wow, that's really amazing. Like
Should we have a mic?
The connection of these communities is
God,
such.
yeah. The guy's gone.
Where do you
All right.
look to find these people?
So the short version is, where does a game person go? Because we have to repeat it for the thing. Hi. Well, so where does
Materia Collective.
Where do? Well, one, Materia Collective is great. We had if you watched our panel discussion actually from earlier in the week, it's called "How to Herd 600 Cats," which is all these musicians that some have game music compositional background and some have just worked in games and some are just musicians. It's a great way to start building those relationships. But the question was, if you're just a game developer or you're just getting in, how do you find these people to work on your game? I would say one great answer is go to things like MAGFest, because a lot of them are physically just walking around right now. A lot of folks have something on the floor or have worked on a ton of titles, and walking through the jam space, even on Thursday night, we had a 4-hour Materia Collective jam session of composers and arrangements of soundtracks where you could hear these people perform live and see how talented they were. I'd also say one really great way to find people is go to things like GDC. There's an audio track, which I highly recommend checking out, and a lot of the composers and people looking for composers are all there. And I think community is a big thing. Like, we keep going, Materia Collective, and that's a community of musicians and game musicians who all know each other, and the group has grown from it started like a small plethora to the first year was 200 and 600, and we had a group photo the other day, and they're all just excited to work on something, and there's never enough games to work on. You just wander into that crowd and go, who wants to work on my game?
And there are more communities more than Materia Collective. We've got
OC
Remix, and there's tons of local ones. I know we have some in Austin.
There's a lot of, if you look up, I love the internet now, especially things like meetups.com and all that things. If you look up, there's probably some sort of game composers collective that meets up semi-regularly in your city, and that's a great place to find them. Go ahead.
I'd like to say 1 in 3 people are musicians, so ask around. You'd be surprised at who you know. The guitarist I picked for one of my projects was actually a game developer friend of mine. He was not a guitarist, but I found out that he's been playing acoustic guitar amazingly for years and years and years. I'm like, why aren't you a musician? I was like, Because he is a musician. He plays in bands for fun on the side. But I would never have known that if I didn't ask a lot of my friends, hey, I'm looking for a guitarist. Hey, just ask a lot of your friends. There's a pretty good chance you either already know someone or know someone who plays whatever instrument you're looking for.
We're so fortunate to live in an age where everything is Googleable, and
Googleable.
There's many organizations online. One I personally recommend is the Game Audio Network Guild. They have so many amazing resources there.
And a directory of members, so you can actually, I think, go online and see who all is a member, which is nice.
And you can see who's in your local area, and it's really cool. And like Bonnie's saying, go to Meetup, look on their stuff, and it's see who's hosting something. You'll never know. Even if it's just one person, you'll be able to meet someone there.
And even though it seems kind of archaic, I still find some people getting work on Craigslist. It's still there, and there's a musician gigs section, and you never know. That might be where, boop, you just put, I need a composer, and someone goes, hey, or you put yourself out there as, hey, looking for work. But Oh, and also game jams are a great place to find people who are good at working fast, because composers who hop into a 48-hour deadline are like awesome.
And also attending events like MAGFest, finding like-minded individuals.
And PAX.
Yeah, and any kind of
Games.com.
event that has those individuals there. It's like,
Indiecade is also very good for that.
I got two
sorry,
good
Emily,
gigs, two solid gigs just from doing music at a game jam once.
Yeah, I actually got like the gig that made me the most money this year out of my other indie gigs. I got that one just because I happened to have worked with them in a game jam, and they were impressed with my work then.
Oh, and that brings up a really good point. So let's say you work on a game jam with someone or something small and you think it's trivial at the time. You never know who your next boss is going to be. It may
Yeah.
be someone that you worked on a silly little project 3 years ago. So always keep a really good rapport and keep in touch with people that you really enjoyed working with. Because I have a gig right now that I had no idea would be a steady voice acting gig with a client who I originally interfaced with through my former employer and remembered working with me 3 years ago. And now they're like a regular, I have weekly check-ins with them and they're fantastic. But they remembered having a good time. And I ran into someone who knew that client when I went to the Here Now Audio Fiction Festival, and I went to a VR demo and found a connection, and the next week it was like, oh my God, Laura, I worked with you 3 years ago, and they remember that you did a good job, that you weren't a jerk, that you got stuff done on time, and sometimes that's all you need.
always put in 100%, even if it was like a small project. I even have an example for myself. When I was back in high school, I worked with a YouTuber, and I didn't think it was much. He just asked me to make music for his YouTube videos and whatnot. He ended up introducing me to someone who works at a music publishing company, where I was able to land my first licensings for UFC, C-Farby TV, and stuff like that. Even though at the time it seems small, you'll be able to meet individuals who's like, oh yeah, I work with this guy. I know someone who's done this and done that, and they'll refer you. And it's very cool when it happens organically like that. Like, even though it may take some time, and it will, it can definitely be worth it. It can definitely be worth it.
And never fake, never fake sincerity. Always being sincere. If you're talking, especially at things like MAGFest, people are so relaxed and just themselves here. It's fantastic. If you go to some conferences, you might meet someone and they're very stiff and like, here's my business card, and I don't know, I do piano. Bye, and they run away, and it's not helpful. But like, talk and have an honest conversation and try to find something in common with people. Like, I found some people that just really loved Muppets, and that's kind of why I wrote for Puppet Chickens once for the Materia thing, because I'm like, let's write something in the style of Muppets, and that turned into like a shtick. And I've actually had people that I've hired to do sound effects and music and voice acting from my chicken choir, because while joking around and writing these silly chocobo themes, turns out some of them are actually voice actors. Some of them have a background in playing really good guitar. And it's like we built this little community and just stayed in touch as friends. And I was able to know who I trust, who actually met their deadlines on time, and who wasn't a jerk. Because no one likes working with jerks.
If you can meet your deadline as a chicken, I'm just saying, it's a good sign.
We have strict chicken deadlines.
Another thing too, make legitimate friendships. Like, these guys are my best friends, and I work with them constantly. Like I said, I helped. She did voice acting for a project I was able to produce, and it's just actually making.
And I had no idea you were going to do that. That was actually really nice. And I was like, this was fun. We should do this more.
Just making genuine relationships, because it's just, we're all humans. Like, no one wants to work with like some sort of like business robot. Here's my business card. I want to work with you, and just like walk away. It's like, that's so weird.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if that happened to you. Like, that wouldn't be cool. So just make genuine friendships. Like, don't be afraid to go out there and just talk to people. Again, we're all human.
Yeah, like on that note, when I first, I'm from Austin, Texas. A lot of us are.
I'm now in Austin, Texas.
I'm also in Austin, Texas.
We're all from Texas.
I just
well, not from, but we
from
currently
Austin.
live in Texas. Yeah.
When I first started scoping out the scene to try to find work, I would always, I'd be hanging out with a bunch of different developers, and I would always ask them, like, okay, well, do you need any audio? And it was always the same thing over and over. They'd be like, oh, my buddy over here's doing the audio, or oh yeah, my friend over there, they're doing the audio, and it became very apparent that game developers hire their friends. So eventually, I kind of got it through my head that making connections is important, but there is nothing more important than making game developer friends. Like, befriend a bunch of game developers. Even if they're not giving you work, they're still, like, that's still very valuable.
And it's beneficial too, because especially if you're just starting out, you might not know what goes on, like in a game developer's mind, or like what their deadlines are like, or what they work on. One great way to actually sample this is if you find someone, if you're best friends with like a QA person, that's the best. Find some way to get on playtest lists for companies if there's any in your city, so you can actually get into a studio once in a while and try a game that's in development, like maybe the heads on all the cool characters are blocks, and the really awesome map is like a sphere with like a globe around it, and there's like words badly typed. But it gives you a good sense of what a non-finished product looks like, and kind of how that cycle might work. And you might start meeting people on the inside of those types of companies. QA means, I forget, what does QA mean? Quality assurance. It's early.
QA, there's other terms for it. Basically just, I've done some QA stuff, beta testing, stuff like that. So anything to get you in that kind of environment.
Yeah, and sometimes they give you free pizza.
And
So if you're a struggling musician, because sometimes we hit that point where free food is great, usually if you test a game, there's free cookies and pizza.
so I'm curious, how do you guys get your gigs?
Pizza. No, wait. Relationships. Lately, it's people that I've already worked with and word of mouth. And because I went full independent after leaving full-time, and gigs all came from mentors and people that I had actually communicated with and kept in touch with, which was fabulous. Like things like the one job, which was from 3 years back, that I ran into someone who just started working with, a person who remembered me. It all came from connection and staying in touch and not being a jerk. And also, I found one big thing when you're independent, like as a contractor, keep up to date with your website, be active on social media.
LinkedIn.
Make sure your LinkedIn is at least, clean and understandable, and says something about creative and what your style is. Because unfortunately, if everyone is just like, I'm a composer and sound designer, and there's nothing listed like, okay, so what styles do you do? Or is there like a website with some samples? Like keep your public appearances, like if you're gonna go hang out at a thing, up to date. And when I say stay active on social media, I don't mean like constantly spam people, but anytime you're doing something creative during downtime, it shows people kind of what you like to work on. Because let's say you're a big djembe player and that's like your thing, that's your shtick, you love djembe. Like talk about the cool djembe stuff that you got going on, and then one day someone who maybe is like, hey, I really need djembe on this project, and 3 people over like, I follow the social media link of this guy who's like totally kick-ass on djembe, you should follow him and get him on your project. Like, so keep things that you love to do posted. If you are indie, I recommend don't put like, dirty pictures, and try not to put the crazy party stuff. Keep things public that are public, the rules. But just stay active, improve your breathing, and make sure your LinkedIn matches your website and your stuff like...
Like, to give you an example of how important LinkedIn is, I apply to a lot of game studios, right? And I usually see on my LinkedIn notification that the recruiter from that company looks at my LinkedIn before they interview me.
Oh yeah, that's creepy when they do that.
Yeah, like you
You're like,
see. So it's very important that you keep it up to date. Like even if it's just like small projects or volunteering, at least you have something there. School, everything. Just keep it up to date, because recruiters definitely look at that. It's very interesting. Like they'll look on you, look for you on social media. They'll stalk you. They will.
And even if your update is, man, I had an amazing time. I was on the show floor at, I don't know, MAGFest, Music and Gaming Festival. It's really great. Lots of cool developers here. Or you never know, that might be a thing where someone goes, oh, I'm also at that thing. He looks neat. Here's what his face looks like. I'm going to hunt that person down. Oh, look, there he is. Would you like a job? And it's weird, but it has happened to people, because that happenstance and timing, it's all about, you never know, like I said, you never know when and who.
Yeah, I got one job from liking Doctor Who. Pretty
Nice.
cool. I'm not going to go farther into that. It's better.
That's all you
No,
need.
I mean, I befriended someone, and so like, I started hanging out with them, and they told me very much up front, like, I'm never going to hire you as a composer. It's nothing, no offense. It's like, I have 3 composers on my list, and if I don't have one, I'm going to go with one of the other 3. Like, it's 3 composers is enough to go through. Turns out, all 3 of them were busy, and he looked at the dude who went to the Doctor Who nights. That's, like, no joke. That's how I got the gig. And I was like, okay, I'm going to submit a bunch of stuff to you. And like, nah, I've heard your stuff. You got it. It's fine. Like, unless you are terrible, we're not going to fire you. It's cool. I'm like, wait, what? Like, don't I have to? What's the audition process? He's like, you don't suck. It's fine. It's like,
You're like, you know what a TARDIS is, you're in.
Well, I've had like 2 big-ish indie projects that I've been working on this year, and one of them was the one that I got because I worked with that team at Global Game Jam 2 years ago. And then last December, they approached me and they were like, hey, we want you to do sounds for the entire game as opposed to just the Global Game Jam prototype. So that worked out for me. Global Game Jam is actually coming up at the end of this month, and if y'all have never done a game jam before, I honestly could not recommend it enough. There's probably one in your city if you're in or near a major city. So look that up, try to go if you can, it will change everything. Or if it doesn't, you'll at least learn a lot.
I'd also like to say game jams are rough, just like real life. I'd say at least half the game jams I've done have been things that fall apart or that they can't even implement the audio because they don't have time.
One thing I would recommend doing to combat against that, and this is what I do, I work on multiple games per game jam. Like, you don't have to go overboard, particularly at the Austin Global Game Jam site. We have so many composers that if I were to like work on 5 games simultaneously, I'd be the jerk who's like stealing all the work. So like, use your judgment. But if you're like the only composer there and there's 4 groups, like, I mean, be smart about and like give them very clear expectations of what you're capable of. But like, why not do audio for all of them? You know?
My record is 6 games at one game jam.
Wow, mine's 4.
To be fair, that was online, and I teamed up with a friend. So
I had 4 at one game jam once, but so I don't win. But I was going to tag off of Emily. You had a really good point about, man, you might feel like a jerk taking all of the work for stuff. I've actually gotten a couple gigs because I was friends with another composer who had too much to do. And they're like, man, I know you also do fantastic work, and this is more in your style. Here's a gig that I wasn't able to take. Don't feel like you just have to talk to the developers. Making connections of other people who maybe have better strengths in other areas can work both ways. Like, maybe I might get something where, I really need something rock and something crazy, and maybe rock's not my high point because maybe I'm more chorus. I have a friend who's really good at rock. He suddenly gets a request to do a gig for chorus. Oh, I really can't do this right now. Would you like this paid gig? I'm going to recommend you. So it's good to keep your community of other composers going because you can help each other out. You might work on each other's tracks or just keep passing the buck.
I'm actually glad that you brought that up because this is actually something that I've done quite a bit of. Because I have this day job, my time is at a little bit of a premium, and so I can't say yes to every gig that comes my way. But I never just say no, goodbye, good luck. I always try to hook them up with someone I know because I think it's good karma. And also, like, it's a tough industry and we gotta help each other, you know? And if you have an opportunity to bring an opportunity to one of your friends, then you should take it. Because who knows, maybe one day they'll do the same for you.
And also, working with friends is very fulfilling because, look, it's nice. And you can trust them to do stuff. And I know it sounds silly, but man, that goes a long way. Like, I've had a lot of people who aren't friends that I try to give work to, or not give work to, but like maybe I've tried to coordinate with because a friend of a friend or something like that. But like, there are a lot of people out there who will drop the ball, and it's nice to know someone who isn't that person.
Yeah.
You know, that's actually that's a great transition to our next topic. One of the biggest issues anyone faces who wants to enter this industry is how do you break into the industry? What can you do to actually, make your impact? So I'm curious, how did you guys make your first big break in the game industry? Either small or big.
I actually have a really it's a good story.
It is a good one. You should go first.
But it's a bad idea.
All right,
So
let's go for it anyway.
okay, so it's fall of 2013. I had graduated the spring before, and I was working at a Buca di Beppo, which is a Italian chain restaurant. as a sort of horrible server host delivery driver combo. My manager comes to me. She's like, Emily, we need you to come in on your day off because we have a delivery that we really need someone to do. And at first I was like, well, I don't really want to come in on my day off. Surely there are other people who would be willing to do this who maybe don't have a day off tomorrow. Like, maybe there's a better way. And then they were like, but Emily, it's to a game studio. You care about that. And it was a low blow, but they ended up shooting themselves in the foot because when I got to that game studio, I was so starstruck and also so desperate to not work in food service anymore that when they signed off for the food, I asked if they were hiring. And it was one of the producers, and he was like, maybe. Here's my card. Send me your resume. And then I was working there next month. Don't do that, though.
Do that. 100% do
No.
that. I don't know. I think
Every
that's
time,
a
Emily, every
great
time-
idea.
That could have gone
don't do that. I'm
really
like, yes,
bad
do that.
wrong. And that's
It would have been worth it. I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I just feel like worst comes to worst, you lose a food job, but you could have gained
it was
an audio
it was a
job,
food
which you
job
did.
that did pay me like pretty okay. I mean, 12 an hour for a food job.
That is
you
actually
could
pretty
you could
good,
do
yeah.
worse. But actually, that actually really helped me break in because my boss, the man who hired me, was a guy named Scott Schneider who.
William Scott Snyder.
Oh yeah, he goes by his middle name. I always forget that.
Yeah.
But
on the internet, he's William.
But he used to work with a woman named Heather Valley, who was the person who actually hired me at Every because she saw Scott listed as a reference. And in fact, she used to work with Scott at that studio that I worked at. It was for, I think she worked on like some of the GameCube Sims games with him.
Cool.
So their connection
Yeah.
helped me get my in-house gig after this initial contract gig that I just kind of bullied my way into. Don't live like me.
My suggestion is to like things. I know that sounds crazy, but just try it. It's pretty cool.
Be yourself.
Like board games, like anime, like sci-fi, like whatever you want. Go out, talk about it.
I was gonna say it's not just like anyone can like things, Nate. But what you said, like, let people know that you like them.
Wear all your interests everywhere. Like, wear it on your sleeves, figuratively and literally.
I mean, get tattoos of Pac-Man on your arm. I mean,
Right, like, let people know your interests. Have a lot of interests. Like, don't just focus in, like, I used to really like Transformers. I still like Transformers, but there was a point in my life where, like, I only like Transformers. But don't be that person. Be a person with a wide array of interests, because the more you like, the more you have in common. And the more you have in common, the more grounds that you, I mean, I'm not saying just use your interests as a battle tactic, but like in real life, half the way we connect with people is common interests. So if you don't have that, you're going to have a harder time across the board. And I think that was one of the, I'm not sure if I was consciously doing that, but across the board, that was one of the smartest decisions I made, I don't know, 5 years back or so, is just find, you know, if someone like says, let's find out about Doctor Who, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I tried once and I couldn't stand it, but let's try it again. And it turns out I was a fan. And if someone tries to get me into something else, I try to get into that too.
You know, it's funny about having common interests. The way I was able to break into the industry was a common interest of Mega Man. So when I was around 14, I wanted to make this ultimate Mega Man game where all the Robot Masters were in it. So I was doing this whole thing in a Flash game. I contacted someone on Newgrounds.com. I was like, hey, I'm looking for someone to do sprite art. Can you help me? And so after a while, we started working on the game. And she ended up telling me, you know what, you suck at game development, but you're a really good musician. I know a friend who I'm actually working for doing the sprite art. He needs music for his game. And I didn't know what it was for. I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I was 14. I was like, hell yeah, I wanted that. Then I found out that it was actually for an Xbox Live indie game. And then at 14, I started making music for a freaking indie game on Xbox Live. And it was just so cool. Like, I randomly just posted on the forums like, hey, I like Mega Man. I want to make this game. Let's do it. And then I ended up getting a job for a Xbox Live indie game. How about you, Bonnie? How did you get into the
I was gonna
industry?
say, where was the original question? How did I, like, as like actual big time, like I'm working, this is my thing?
More
Yeah,
like
well,
what's
well-
advice that you would say to people trying to start?
Oh, trying to
try-
start. 'Cause
Yeah,
I was
like-
going to say,
Do you get your first gig?
to get your first gig, well, in my case, I kind of, like Emily's, like, mine was a weird trip of how to get in there. I got in through writing a zombie opera. So, so like Smash Opera is like a later version of how things kind of came out of that. But I always stayed in touch with musicians and crazy people who like making odd things. And I used to do mostly theater. I was a stage manager for a long time. But there was a lack of jobs at one point, and I was picking up some stuff doing sound design for indie films. And once in a while, someone needed a couple sounds for games because they knew that I did sounds for films. And word of mouth started getting me little gigs to do bits, because it's like, hey, she makes sounds and turns them in on time. Awesome. So I kept slowly picking up more in the balance of helping with indie film, getting more games, because I just started meeting more and more people. And then there was a big sudden, I forget, it was like the government, a lot of funding for the arts dropped out around 2008, 2009. And I was originally, like, most of my income, even though I did sound effects for games and TV and whatever not, was coming from being a stage manager and working on fun shows. Suddenly there were no shows because no one had money and no one had time. So me and a couple friends decided to write a show that didn't exist, which was a zombie opera about zombie survival, because I'm from Pittsburgh, which is where George Romero's from. So we wrote this zombie opera. We made it a multimedia zombie opera because I'm a technical person. We brought in our friends who all needed work, which included game developers and filmmakers and whatnot. And I had to have a mob scene in the background because it was a projected backdrop of like zombies coming to kill the singers on stage. And turned out 4 of the people in my mob of people who were in the city and volunteered worked at a game called the game company Shell Games. And the artist who designed the poster for my show, she was the head of the art department. She ended up being my boss because once a position, like a seat of the audio person they had in the house was gone, like the person left to work for EA, they were like, Bonnie, there's like a seat open here. You should put in for this because we know that you do crazy stuff. I'm like, well, yeah, I don't really do like game audio. That's not like my job. I guess I'm a theater person. They're like, no, you've done like this, that, the other thing, and you're cool and weird, and hey, zombies, that really works with the game industry. So put in, apply, and I did, and I got the job. So I got mine through theater connections and just keeping in touch with people and them knowing that I can work on a really crazy deadline. Zombies, robots, whatever, it's like, wee! And I like that. I like being covered in corn syrup. So, and whenever I started working at Shell, I found out that one of the heads of narrative got his job because on his resume it said that he worked on a ninja play. Like he wrote a play about ninjas that fight. And that was awesome. So I got my job with a zombie opera and he got his writing a play about ninjas. So you never know where your weird quirks and your side things are going to come in handy. Like for Nate, it was Doctor Who, and mine was corn syrup. So yeah.
So and now.
Is that the answer?
Yeah, that's a really good answer. So after you get your first gig, how do you keep getting more gigs? How do you get your second gig, your third gig, and your fourth gig? How do you keep making sure you're working as an audio professional?
Connections.
Yeah.
Yeah, the big chunk earlier.
Yeah,
It's all
that
about,
was the hardest
yeah.
part I had after my first gig, because I'd had this false assumption, and I found out from numerous people that they also had this assumption, like, that first gig, the doors are going to open, and now the work is actually
gonna
going
fall
to come.
in.
Yeah.
It's just gonna fall
And,
on
that's
you.
not how it
and then,
happens.
like, I was like, any day now, any day. Just waiting for those emails.
Yeah,
Surely all those fans will.
You have to be. What's the word? Is it
something.
proactive or active? The one where you
Yeah.
can't just. Some people are like magically blessed and work just goes wee and falls on top of them without doing anything. But you do have to be active in the community. Be active, like I said. Keep your social media active, even if it's you just lying in bed going, "Oh God, work." Like still, try to just keep a positive outlook and just write what you're working on. And if there's a slump, like maybe not your first game or maybe right after your first game, and you're like nothing's happening, just be creative. Do something to keep your juices going. Maybe learn a new skill, maybe investigate, maybe there's a job you want, but you don't know how, like we were talked about implementation, right? Maybe you've never used Unity before, and a lot of indie people are using Unity or Unreal. Start training yourselves in stuff that will up your game and keep you active. And post about it on your feed, like, man, I just finished this kick-ass tutorial about like how to do audio implementation on something. And someone else would be like, man, now that I know that guy that I was considering but never told him about actually knows implementation, I'm going to contact him about a gig.
You could also do a nerdcore rap album, but make sure you release it.
Did you finally release your nerdcore rap album?
Say what?
Did you release it?
No, that's where I made my mistake.
Supposed to have.
I got shy last minute. I actually came to MAGFest and I was gonna like try to preview it, and I kind of put it on SoundCloud, but because I was like afraid to advertise myself. I think I shot myself in the foot because I put a lot of time in that.
And I think it's almost an imposter syndrome thing. Like, well, it's not really ready. I don't want to post it yet. I find that, and I'm bad at this too. Like, there's a point where, especially when you're advertising yourself, just put it out there. Because if something is 80% awesome, but no one ever sees it, it's 0% anything, right?
Mm-hmm. And going back on the education, if you're looking for resources, actually our website, survivingindie.com, or .org, sorry, we're working on a database of all sorts of self-learning online courses. Some of them that we have featured, like Udemy.
Udemy.
Is that how you say that?
It's like UDEMY, however you say that word.
I thought it was Udemy.
Yeah, I've always said Udemy.
And this is where a pronunciation guide in a WAV file would be really helpful.
How dare you?
We also feature, for those who aren't doing audio, we have stuff for, I mean, there's some stuff on other sites too, like Pluralsight. We have a lot of stuff. We're still working on it.
Do we post our thing from Otaku Fair yet?
Not yet, no.
Okay, so.
But we'll, if you go to survivingindie.com, you'll be able to actually find
Org.
.org. I keep saying .com. I haven't slept yet, sorry.
Good morning.
Yeah, .org, survivingindie.org. We're working on a database. If you have any suggestions, just contact us. We're always looking for new resources to help individuals. Yes.
Yeah.
So after you get your first gig, how do you handle contract? Do you write your
There is a book called.
So the question is, after you get your first gig, how do you handle contracts and stuff like that?
So you get paid. That's the part missing.
There's a book called The Guide to Game Audio by Aaron Marks. It comes with sample contracts. I used those for a long period of time with editing to the best of my abilities. I was also lucky that my university forced me to take legalese classes and contracts classes, so I knew a lot of the language. If you didn't have that opportunity, as I think a lot of people did not, I would recommend trying to find some kind of YouTube course online for common phrases and commonalities and how to phrase things. That's not to say you are a lawyer, and you should get a lawyer, but frankly, as an independent audio composer or audio person, I don't usually get paid enough to get a lawyer for a lot of my contracts. So what I have done actually, now that I'm hopefully getting enough gigs to justify it, I did pay for a specialized contract to be written for me by my lawyer that I will be using on most games, and I basically told him I need the sections to be very as stand apart as possible so that I can just go clip and just take it out if we're not using that effect of that contract. And that's been very helpful. But prior to that, it was very much me editing that same document that came with the amazing Aaron Marks book, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend it. I think it's in its 3rd or 4th edition now. And it comes with a large sampling of contracts, but they are all samples of big company contracts. So all the contracts are based on you totally selling your music buyout gigs, which as an indie person, I would suggest you don't do.
There are other resources for those like me. I'm still learning legalese, and the terms can be very scary and it's just very intimidating. One of the websites I've used is actually called Rocket Lawyer, and for a monthly fee, I believe it's $39.99, you'll have access to a database of contracts, whether you're a freelancer, almost anything you can think of for legal, and you'll be able to consult a lawyer through their portal. And they'll give you, I think it's like one free consultation, like, hey, am I doing this right? Is this contract correct? And it's really cool for those who are like wanting to get that legal aspect of their project, but they're free, because legalese is scary. Like it's very intimidating, and you wanted to mention some more about
Oh,
that.
yeah. One really good resource if you're big Facebook people. Also, going back to community, tons of Facebook groups for people starting out. I highly recommend Game Audio Denizens. If you want to self-promote yourself, there's one actually called Game Audio Self-Promotion, because a lot of Facebook groups are like, please do not promote your products, please do not advertise yourself here, we will delete it. So a lot of us got tired of that, and Jeff Ball, I think, made the group. He's a fantastic violinist and game composer. He made a group called Game Audio Self-Promotion, primarily for you to dump all your, like, I play this, hire me, here's a sample, hire me, dump it all there. Anyway, going back to contracts, the one I was supposed to talk about was business skills for composers. I think Jean Lee made that one. It's a great group, and the main purpose of that is a lot of lawyer type people or people used to making contracts will give you advice for free. And I think Hex and the Audio also provided into that group samples of contracts that you can use. For your own needs. But I find that going back to legalese being confusing, if you ever are handed a contract and you don't understand some of the funny print, ask. You are allowed to ask. Always know exactly what things mean before you sign it, because you'll find maybe you work for a company and they're fine to tweak a whole bunch of stuff, or maybe they're set in stone, but you want to know what all those weird terms actually mean for you and for your music or your sound effects. You know.
And there's so many resources online. Like it's like a one-time fee. You can ask a lawyer, "Hey, does this look right, or am I getting screwed?" And they'll review it for you. It's usually under $100, but in my opinion, that's worth it. Like you'd be getting screwed like out of millions if it's a big project. Like paying $60 for a lawyer to review it is an amazing deal. So,
Yeah.
like I said before, we live in an age where everything is Googleable, and we're in the information age. So just don't be afraid to go online and search for that kind of stuff. And I know it's difficult to find resources like that, but like I said, a Rocket Lawyer does offer a service like that. So if you're ever afraid or need help, they're an amazing service. So.
Yeah. Oh, question.
Yeah.
How, in terms of payment, do you accept different kinds of payment? So,
Yes.
like a one-time fee?
So the question is, do we accept
What are the different types of
different types of payments? Do we accept?
And also
Let's see,
like
percentage.
and payments.
And payments, yeah.
Payments versus
Yeah.
payments.
Percentage payment up front, dividing up front, and then later, maybe after the game is released. I also always, here's the thing, there is a good chance your game will not be released when you think it is or never released. Always have something in that contract that says you still get paid.
Yes.
No matter what
Yes.
language you use, you should still get paid. So like if that game never comes out, have something in there that even though you're supposed to be paid like a month after the game's released,
And
or
a big important thing is if you're working on a free project or a royalty share, make sure that you keep the rights to your music so you can sell the music afterwards.
Yeah.
You may end up making more money from your music selling it after the game is sold. That's very important.
I'd also say in general, make sure if you're
general.
if you're getting paid indie money, which I'm assuming most of us are, I don't know. Keep the rights to your music. There's no reason they need to buy the rights to your music for the most part.
I mean, if they can afford them,
then totally.
Then
You
okay.
can totally buy that.
But usually they're not going to want to spend that much.
But the problem I've encountered is I've met a lot of indie music people who do not understand that, and so they're literally selling the rights. It's a complete buyout offer for the lowest dollar, and I'm like, no way.
And that's why and that's another reason, like once you have that contract, I've had some jobs where they just copy whatever contract they found that is like the general contract from the internet, and it might be a complete bio thing, and they don't even know what that means. They're like, nope, sign this. This is generic music contract from internet. And I had one of those, and Nate, you remember going over one of those with me. I'm like, this is not at all what I want, but I guess a couple sentences are usable, like the name of the person, and we completely changed it. And the guy was fine with it because he said, oh, that's fine. I just grabbed whatever contract
In fact, I would almost encourage you to take the initiative and, again, start with some online contract that you're comfortable with and say, like, I'll provide it. Please stop.
You already have a template. Half the time they're like, oh, thank God, because I don't know what to
I
write
actually
for
have a
you.
really good question. So what if you're just starting out, you have no credits? Should you take the job for free or should you ask for something?
Always get percentage. If it
Get something.
get something, get
Yeah.
a sandwich.
I mean, it just
Food.
I've gotten
depends on
paid
the
in food
project.
before. It was awesome.
I got paid in food before too. It was
And of
funny.
course, keep your rights. I kept my
And
rights.
keep your rights.
Like if,
Yeah.
if no one else is getting paid, like no one else, still take a percentage. Like that's fine. We'll never get paid together.
Also,
I will get 10% of nothing. That's cool. But the thing is, 10% of nothing still means if you change your mind, we're in it together, right? And that's my take on that.
always,
but I also
keep your your ownership of the actual stuff, and also the make sure it's in writing that you're allowed to talk about it, that you worked on it. I was actually one contract I had. It was a default contract, and it said the full credit will go to the game, and your name will not appear anywhere. And I'm like, if I'm only being paid this little, it's like, no, I want to be able to say, I did the sounds, I did these specific things, and it goes online. Because it's weird how many of those default things, it's like everything came from this one name that is not at all related to you.
Yeah.
It's silly, but you want to be able to say, I worked on this.
I would like to talk about also the biggest I've not had many bad gigs. I've been very blessed. Almost every gig I've worked for has been fantastic. There was only one gig I had that was just like really awkward. And man, it had the biggest red flag, and I'm moving soon. I need money. Like, okay, like it's fair. I think we all would have probably taken it despite the red flags. But I had one gig where they really were uncomfortable with all of the things that would have been in a standard contract, all of it. So I had to pay a lawyer to write a very specific contract, and they kept like this. It wasn't one thing they needed to add. It was just this constant their way of doing things, which was totally different. And all of those things pointed to a company that was micromanaging and wanting too much control of how I spent my time, instead of letting me do things my way. And it ended up being exactly the kind of gig that would imply it would be, which is like I had to redo a sound effect, I am guessing 20 times for one sound effect.
Make sure if you think you're ever going to have to do something like that, that there's somewhere in your contract that after so many revisions, it counts as
So
a
they
new
actually
job.
knew that. I told them I'd only give them 3 revisions, and they're like, okay, so we want a contract where we can give you infinite revisions. I'm like, I could just charge you every time I do it. And they're like, okay. And you know what? It wasn't worth it. Like even though I was getting paid per one, it's just like the mental stress of working on one sound effect over and over and over again.
Got anything?
What?
I just want to see if you had anything to make sure.
Well, I mean, I was so engrossed in the story. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't want to leave you out. I want to make sure you're all good.
I've actually had a gig like that, kind of similarly, and I didn't think to. Actually, it was kind of an interesting contract because I was being paid hourly. I was much more used to, okay, this much up front and then rest of payment upon completion, but they were just like, well, we're just more comfortable with paying you hourly. And I mean, they always paid me on time, so that worked out for me, but there were never any provisions made for revisions. But it was also hourly, so the more revisions they asked for, and that means the more hours I worked. But I had a kind of similar experience in that the mental stress of having to redo sounds over and over, that didn't feel great. In fact, it was actually very demoralizing because. And part of the problem, and this is something that is slightly off topic, but I do really want to impart to you guys, part of that is that they kept on listening to just the WAV files out of the context of the game.
That's a great tip.
Do not let them do that. You have
Yes.
to train them. You have to train them to not do that. You have to tell them, okay, here are some sounds. I need you to put them
Yes,
in the
they
game.
have to be like a footstep. I once was on a project where they kept wanting to edit the footstep noises, which there's 20 of them. I'm like, have you heard them with the background sound and everything else? Or they were listening to every single
Yeah. I got 2 stories related to that. One, I must have done so many revisions on a pair of footsteps. I think you worked with me on that one.
I was on that project.
Yeah, we did so many
God,
revisions of
so many
footsteps,
feet.
and I was desperate, and I kept trying different things, different techniques. We settled on me tapping as lightly as humanly possible on Gene. So the
Oh my
issue was
God.
they were listening to it too loud out of context. And finally one time I'm like, can you like turn the volume down a good bit and then like listen to it? They were like, oh, that sounds great. I'm like,
Yeah, no, really?
but, like,
oh my
you know,
god.
I get it. That's
went
on me
for,
though,
like,
because I
week
should have
two.
known to point that
Oh
out
my
to them.
God.
And another side story to that, and this is from a person I adore, one of my good friends, and I've worked with them. And like they said the nicest and the meanest thing at the same time, but I love it, which was, yeah, I never think your music's all that good until I listen to it in the game. And I'm like, it's like
But that's and here's a good tip and trick for you guys. When you're working on indie games or any type of game, always ask for footage of the game in its current state.
Yes.
Because even if you don't have a way to implement it yourself, I do something. I just call my things audio painovers, where you take the footage and you go into like a video editing program and you place your stuff over top and do a painover and you send it back so they can at least see how it works in context with like music playing and something else. And you can lower the volumes to on
Yeah.
the different tracks. And technically it's linear, but it gives them enough that they're like, oh, I get it. That's okay. Yeah, it's footsteps. Cool.
I'm so sorry to cut you off. We do have like
Learn video editing if you don't have a video editing software.
Our panel ends at 10:30, and I want to make sure that all the questions are answered. So we have one on Twitch that was asked earlier. I'm trying to find it. Let's see. Yes. So how do you make players feel warm, or how do you make them feel cold? How do you make them really get them immersed in that experience?
So I think another interesting thing is among musicians, warm and cold can mean something very specific. Warm can also mean like a very mid-tone mix, where you
and
don't
it's not
have that many high ends.
And it's not just music, because I think sound design works.
Yeah,
too.
that works as well. So like in the context of that would be one way to do it. But in terms of like if you're talking about the warm level,
It'd be
there's
like
a lot
like
of
temperature.
tropes.
Yeah,
then there's the cold level, which usually has some kind of sheeny ice sound.
Yeah, there are a lot of tropes. Like I'm trying to think of,
Xylophones.
like something
warm
very.
is bassy, because it's all like rumbling and lava, depending on the level. And cold can be whistly and high, like Nate said, treble. And it also depends on, I would counter whoever asked those, like, what is the art style and what are the backgrounds in your game? Because maybe warm is like you're in an oven, or it could be you're surrounded by lava, or it could be you're in the sun.
So
Like,
it really
it might
depends
change.
on the context, but generally what I do is instrument choice, style choice, chord progression choice. It can really change how a person feels when they're playing a game. I truly believe that audio can make or break any kind of project, because that's how you're able to tell the audience, like, okay, there's a tense scene coming up, or it's like, something like that. So it really depends on those kind of choices.
And I think a color is a good description. Like whenever
Color,
I think
yeah.
warm or cold, I think color, like almost like color, where it's with the U. And because I remember working on, what is it, the Holst with Mars, that one. And whenever I was back in my stage management days, I loved that I got to help work with the lighting board guy, because when they would play that, we would always bring red up slowly, and the room would turn red, and I just loved those little tricks. So it helps to really be, if you can, and you're lucky enough on an indie game or to be in-house, always be in tune with the art department to know kind of what visuals they have in mind. And your sound design for what warm is might help them, and vice versa with what matches it. Because again, it's all in context. We can't, it's hard to say how do you make just warm and just cold without knowing the game and what the universe is.
It's also just associations of sounds, right? Like warm, what do we think of warm? We think of fire, we think of burning coals, we think of embers, things like that.
Or is the word warm meaning comforting and safe?
Also, yeah.
And this is another thing where context and
Yeah. Well, I think I'm guessing they're just walking around outside MAGFest, because seriously, it's freaking cold out there.
Yeah.
Warm is when you're not outside the Gaylord in the
Yeah.
street.
So do you
Yeah.
guys have any questions for us? Yes, sir.
When you're just acquiring sounds, either to catalog or for a specific purpose, do you have any tips on isolating outside noises, assuming you're recording outside or in the field,
So the question.
outside of studio?
So do you mean like
Sonic isolation.
Repeat the question.
So the question is, whenever we're collecting sounds and whatnot, and make sure I have this correct, making sure like the background noise from certain sounds are isolated and stuff like that. So making sure there's no. So let's say, for example, there's.
You're recording something outside,
So
so you
I'd
want to get rid of the outside background noise. Is that, or are you talking about like you want to make like a secure place inside your house or something?
Definitely outside.
So I
So,
think the
I
rough.
think it's good.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I think the rough part there is you can't control everything. Like there are probably some ways to try to get rid of car sounds, but a lot of it's just finding the right spot to record if you're talking sound effects.
the right
whatnot.
microphone.
The right microphone. Important. Shotgun mic. Seriously.
Yeah.
Shotgun mic. It makes all the difference in the world. Don't use your cardioid mic.
And
Cardioid
don't use
mic,
something like, you know, any of these guys.
Yeah. Shotgun mic is all the difference in the world, and maybe get a nice absorption, either a blanket or mineral wool or fiberglass. They don't handle the fiberglass safely, obviously, but some kind of panel that would help you with that, and then you can put it behind the shotgun mic, because shotgun mic gets a very forward-facing thing, but also because of the way that a shotgun mic's designed, it also gets what's behind it.
So you
if
kinda
you
wanna
put
make-
what's behind it, well, it'll help you isolate those sounds a lot.
And also, I know, especially when working, like, I did a lot of indie film, like, we would always get room tone when outside and everything else. Always get, like, if you can, 30 seconds of nothing moving, and not even specifically the sound in what's going on that you want. So if you have a good noise reduction software, you can have a pad of the universe in addition to that sound you're trying to get. And then you can copy that and remove a lot of, like,
I was
wind
about
or
to say, I
yeah.
always, just because I don't have super great equipment, I don't have a shotgun mic just yet, but I always just take the noise out in post, and
Yeah.
and I mean, even Audacity can do that, you know? There are really good options
Yeah,
for that.
no. If you have Adobe Creative Cloud or use Audition, there's a really good noise removal software built in, which is really good. And even when I give VO stuff, you don't always, like, even when people are recording in a booth at home, depending on what their booth situation is, if it's just a closet or wherever not, air conditioning sound is very present, and it changes pitches sometimes too. Always ask, like, if someone sends you files and you're cutting them down, don't have them too short, because make sure they leave enough that you can capture a sample of what their air conditioning sounds like behind them, so you can take it out.
Also, turn your air conditioning off.
And if you can, turn it off.
Consider doing
Or if
that.
you're lucky, I had this one house once before I moved where we found the one closet that actually fit a person, and that part of the house did not have an HVAC system running through that specific wall. It was like perfect. So it was the only place where I didn't have to remove air conditioner noise.
So for outside recording, what are some challenges you could face trying to get, like, for example, like here we want to record snow. What are some hurdles you would face, and how can you overcome, like,
You want to
certain-
record snow.
well, stepping
like-
on snow, like, you know.
You
let's
fake
say-
it in post and you use corn starch
Yep.
in a bag.
I was about to say.
I was going to
Crunch,
say another
crunch,
suggestion is
crunch.
drive away from the city, because otherwise you're just
Oh
going to get
God,
cars.
avoid the city and don't be anywhere near an airport.
Yeah.
if you can avoid it.
You're going to hear it. It's going to have cars. It's going to have airplanes flying overhead.
But honestly, like, you're like, where can I go outside to record the best snow? I'd say don't record snow. Fake snow sounds better than snow. And I think a lot of Game of Thrones, they used the cornstarch method. It was the bag, and they added extra, like,
I had a game that had a lot of sand. That sand was quinoa. The sand.
quinoa.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I had a game where I had to pour oatmeal repetitively and cereal, and instead I just used rice, and rice sounded better than actual oatmeal.
So what other questions do you guys have for us?
Anybody online got any additional questions? How much
Got
time
like
do we
8
got?
minutes left.
I'll just
We
go.
have 8
I'll just go ahead and
minutes.
say hi, Dino. Thanks for commenting.
Hi, Diwa. Thank you for coming. How are you still awake? Oh my God.
Well,
Let me
Thanks for
think if
coming,
I can
sir.
think of any
I'm trying
questions.
to think. This has been a very improvisational panel.
Improvisational.
Improvisational. Ugh, I haven't slept yet.
Dictation guides are really helpful. Ask for them in WAV or MP3. I feel like I should just put that on repeat. It helps so many people.
I have a large list here. We can go through that.
Oh yes.
Oh, we got more questions than we made up for ourselves.
All right.
We came prepared just in case.
I have not read these. Delegating.
We made
we
these.
talked about
Yeah, we
delegating.
talked about that.
Cost effectiveness.
I think we have one in there.
Don't buy software just to get more software and say, I have all the software in the world. That's a great one, especially for people starting out.
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah.
bottom one on the list. Because you may hear about, like, oh, there's new plugins here, there's new great. I would say, first, be proficient in the software you already have. Because you might find, like I say, I found out Adobe Audition does like 90% of the stuff I need for sound design. And now I just mostly use that. And I use Logic for composition because it has everything I need. But I'm not a super knowledgeable person in sampled sounds. And whenever, like, for example, Nate, whenever you help me with any projects that I send your way that need better samples for piano or what, I know that you kick ass at sample libraries. So delegating is also on that list. I say, Nate, I got this all mocked up. Can you make this sound better? And then we share the load. He gets some work, and I get the composition I want. So, I don't know. Be really good in what you have. Be like, if you really like Premiere for your video thing to make mock-ups, learn how to use all the tricks in Premiere. Learn all the shortcuts. Do a tutorial. You know, just be really good at what you have before you start spending money on things that maybe you'll never use. Because what's the good about 5% knowing a software and 700 copies than being like the expert?
I'd also say if you're going to buy some really good software, like get one good EQ. You don't need all the good EQs. Like avoid gear envy, which is pretty. I just wanted to go out on that one because I've suffered a bit from that where I just keep reading articles. Oh, this is the best compressor. I'm like, it sounds like a compressor, man. Like I got a pretty good hearing. I'm pretty sure it sounds just like a compressor.
Also, there's a lot of free 30-day versions of things. So before you go out and just buy, try it first. And maybe it's like, oh, like Nate said, it sounds like 500 things I already have. I don't need this.
Yes, sir. How can we help you?
So I think, like, right on this topic, what do you think of as the absolute bare minimum that you can have to be viable, you know, in terms of your gear and your software?
A Game Boy.
I honestly, I've used a lot of stock stuff from like Logic Pro X and whatnot. If you're just starting out, it's really good stuff for a beginner. If you're looking for
For music and sound effects, or
I think Logic Pro X is probably...
Oh, I'm so sorry. The question was, what software do you need to start out? Like, what is good for beginners? So sorry.
I personally think Logic Pro X is the best
If you're
bang
a
for the
Mac.
buck that you can get. If you don't have a Mac, Hackintoshes are pretty easy to do these days and not entirely illegal.
So we have room for one more question.
also get an audio editing and cleaning software, something like Adobe Audition if you can. Otherwise, Audacity is free. It's a great way to start getting used to that sort of thing.
And if you use Mac, Twisted Wave is pretty cheap.
And I mean, Reaper is $60.
And there was a tutorial, I think,
Reaper's
this
great.
weekend on Reaper.
And basically free before you pay those $60.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So we do have
They're worth the $60. You should give them your money.
room for one more question. Do you guys
boy.
have any questions?
Not, we got a made up one, so.
Anybody
Oh,
in this blob have a question? You asked a lot of really good questions.
Yes. Any more questions before we?
We'll make up a question. Okay,
Yes.
go for it.
Do you need formal education to pursue a career in game audio or any kind of creative industry for that matter?
What is formal education?
Okay.
A college degree or anything like
I
that?
went to music school.
So I went to get a degree in music technology. I'm not going to say it wasn't helpful. I learned a lot of really cool things that I might have otherwise not learned. That was great. Was it worth the effectively 6 years that it took me to get it? But like even if I took just 4 years, was it worth that? And I think a lot of the things I would have learned had I just asked more experienced people. It's nice though, because I do have a degree that's helpful, and if I wanted to go take that further, I could, and that's also helpful. But required for the industry, I don't think so.
I would counter, though, that if you want to get an in-house position, a lot of jobs will only accept you
Helpful.
if you at minimum have a bachelor's degree.
Cool.
Yeah. One thing to keep in mind, though, so I have a composition degree from the University of Texas, and that was pretty good for, like, teaching me to write a pretty mean string quartet. But it became really obvious when I graduated, and especially on my first job, that if I wanted to have a long-term career in this, I couldn't just do that. So I ended up taking a year off to go back to school. I went to Austin Community College, which happens to have a really good recording arts program. So I guess technically I do have formal education in that as well, but the more I learned, the more I just kept on like kicking myself, just thinking like, oh my God, I could have been doing this in my entire time at UT just on the side. There are so many resources. And I didn't because I was too busy trying to be like a good classical music student. So just like,
Well,
if you're thinking about a music degree, maybe keep that in mind.
But it's still good. Like, I have a music tech composition degree and a master's in multimedia, and I feel like between the two, still, like, you will learn certain basic sets, but until you get out there and start actually working and actually creating, that's when you learn. So no matter what, real life skills are gained outside, and training yourself once you know what you want to focus on it really helps too. And we talked about, we're going to post a lot of these resources on our website, but things like Udemy, there's a lot of tutorials on YouTube, GameSoundCon has live tutorials. Like, there are a lot of ways to learn for free now that can help you up yourself.
Doing is very important. I learned a lot, not necessarily just from my education, but from doing a lot
Yeah.
on my free time, composing, constantly composing.
So unfortunately,
keep
we do
creative.
have to wrap up this panel. I wanted to take a moment to thank you guys. First, I want to thank MAGFest for allowing us this opportunity. Thank you so much. It really means the world to all of us. Thank you guys for showing up.
Early. Oh, thank you for being awake and actually asking questions.
So surviving indie, my whole idea with it is I want to create a platform that allows anyone of any level, whether you're a veteran or a beginner, to have a resource, a database to allow yourself to find new things, network with individuals, and meet like-minded individuals who are in your field and similar.
Yeah.
In your own. Field and whatnot. It's going to be for anyone in the game industry, whether you're a programmer, producer, musician, anything like that. So I'm still working on that platform. I have no idea when we're going to be fully released yet, but just survivingindie.org. We're on Facebook,
Yeah.
a Tumblr.
I guess follow us now, and when stuff starts pouring in.
Oh yeah,
she'll-
we actually have a show. We're doing another panel at PAX South. We'll be talking about surviving development hell.
Next weekend.
So if you think of more questions you want to ask us, just ask us on Twitter and we'll answer on that one.
Yeah, and I think they might be streaming and
Or
recording that too.
outside.
Yes.
We'll,
I think
we'll
they
also be
record their
outside here in a
So
second.
before we go, do you guys would like to promote your stuff, get your stuff out there? I know, Nate, you had an album that was just released.
I just launched an album called Circuitry Stories Sistel. So if you want to check that out, just Google Nathaniel Chambers or Bubble Pipe Media or Circuitry Stories Sistel.
Circuitry, what's the last word?
Sistel.
Circuitry stories.
Just Circuitry Stories might be best on that one.
Well, okay, I guess
Very
I have
cyberpunk.
3 things I can plug. First thing is that my Buffy the Vampire Slayer slot game is going to be
and it's
hitting
awesome.
casinos in March. I do not know which casinos.
Yeah.
But if you're at a casino in
Stuck
March,
in a casino, only
keep
play
an
her
eye
game.
out.
And we're working on a game that's coming out in probably a month or two called Outpost Delta,
Yeah.
which is sort of a Metroidvania-esque game with maybe some Doom elements thrown in for
And
good
the
measure.
uncompleted version already won an award.
Yeah,
we won
so
an
that's
award
cool.
recently.
I actually have
cool.
one more thing to plug because I
go for it.
promised my team I would. I'm
Real
also
quick.
working on an indie
We're on
game on
overtime
the
now.
side called Small Talk.
We can still
Look it
talk
up.
to the
It's on.
audience.
We're on itch.io. It's a cool artsy thing.
And so yeah, I was in Aria Kart, Smash Opera yesterday. Thank you if any of you came to our show. We have a behind the scenes, how we did it and why, and lessons learned from trying to create a crazy opera thing at 1 o'clock in panels 4 today. And otherwise, for pictures and footage of the show, in case you missed it, it's all going to be posted on www.supersmashopera.com and all of the Twitters and everything else.
She has the shirts.
It's really amazing.
The poster looks like this. We're also selling these shirts and stuff in the merch hall, and we'll have buttons and things in our panel. So if you want a button, come on down. Otherwise, I wanted to pimp another resource for you guys. I'm currently an active mentor in a new thing called AMP. It's the Audio Mentorship Program. And if you feel like you're in the industry and you need a personal help, someone to help guide you, you can apply, and an industry person who can actually check in with you and give you advice will be assigned to you. So look up AMP. It's a audio mentorship program. In case I'm saying it wrong, I will definitely post the right link on our
So
website.
we'll be outside if you guys would like to talk to us. Otherwise, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You guys rock.
Thank you on Twitter, and thanks, Dino, for showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you guys on
Internet
Twitch.
people for asking questions from your beds and stuff.
Oh my god, it is so cold.
I hope you enjoyed MAGFest.
Enjoy the last whatever hours of MAGFest.